Good evening. My name is Jennifer LaRue. I'm the Director of Public Programs at the Mark Twain House and Museum in Hartford, Connecticut. And I'm thrilled to be your host this evening for a conversation with two wonderful authors, Philippa Gregory and Sophfronia Scott. We'll get started in just a minute. I just want to first of all thank both of them for being here with us and to thank you in the audience for joining us for this special event. A few housekeeping things for those of you who have not used Crowdcast before. Even though the presentation this evening is pre-recorded, the chat is live, so you all can keep on chatting with one another and share notes and let us know where you're from if you want. Just keep the chat going, and that's always as a little element of fun. And in this crazy time we live in, it kind of makes us feel a little bit more like we're in the same room. So please have fun there. I'd also like to draw your attention to the bottom of your screen where you see a long kind of turquoise colored button that says your support is vital to the Mark Twain House and Museum. These are crazy times for all of us, but particularly crazy for the Mark Twain House, which has once again had to close its doors because of the spike in COVID cases. And I'm not sure people know that the house tour is our main source of revenue, and so we're without that right now. And so I say all this by way of asking you, if you have anything to spare, if you're able and willing to click that donate button. I would say on behalf of the staff of the Mark Twain House and the Board of Trustees, we appreciate every penny. So thank you for that generosity if you're able to spare. The Mark Twain House is what I like to call a writer's home and a home for writers. We're always excited to invite new people, new writers into our circle. Sophfronia Scott is already one of our favorite writers. She's participated in a number of programs with us, including giving a keynote speech at our Writers' Weekend in July. We're looking forward to inviting and welcoming Philippa Gregory into that circle as well. So I'm going to briefly introduce the two of them, and then I'm going to sit back and enjoy the conversation with you. So Sophfronia Scott began her writing career as a journalist for Time and People magazines. When her first novel, All I Need to Get By, was published in 2004, she was nominated for Best New Author at the African American Literary Awards and was hailed by Henry Louis Gates Jr. as potentially one of the best writers of her generation. Scott is the new founding director of Alma College's low residency MFA in creative writing program. And we're very excited about this. Her new book, The Seeker and the Monk, Everyday Conversations with Thomas Merton, is published in March 2021. Philippa Gregory is one of the world's foremost historical novelists. She wrote her first novel, Wideacre, when she was completing her Ph.D. in 18th century literature, and it sold worldwide, heralding a new era for historical fiction. Her flair for blending history and imagination developed into a signature style, and she went on to write many best-selling novels, including The Other Boleyn Girl, The White Queen, and of course the book we're here to talk about tonight. We congratulate her on the publication of Dark Tides. So everyone, please join me in welcoming Sophfronia and Philippa.
Hi. Thank you.
And welcome, Philippa.
Glad to be here. Thank you so much.
So Jennifer just mentioned Dark Tides. And Dark Tides is actually the second book in a new series, the Fairmile series. And while you are best known for writing about historical figures, names that are known, such as Anne Boleyn, this series is about ordinary people. And I wanted to ask you about your motivation behind doing that. But I also wanted to ask, when I read these two books, Philippa, I just felt that you had a certain affection for these characters and for the scope of this series. So I wanted to talk to you, both as, okay, why did you want to do this? But something tells me that there's a heart thing involved here as well, and I wanted to hear about that.
I am tremendously attached to my characters. It's turning into something of a problem in that what I want to write ultimately is a long series, several books spanning centuries, because what I'm hoping to do in the end is, in a sense, trace the progress of prosperity in England from a poor family to a very wealthy family in, say, something like the early 19th century, through one family, from very, very humble beginnings, by looking at their connection to global trade, to empire, to some of the criminal acts of empire, and to some of the extraordinary adventurous acts as well. So what I'm hoping for is a long span of time. And unfortunately for me, I've become very, very attached to my first characters in Tidelands. And so book 2, we're not moved on a century at all. We're actually just the next generation. And like how I'm going to peel myself off this particular family and jump on in the time that I'm allowing myself, I don't yet know. It's one of the joyful difficulties of falling in love with your characters, that I know the readers are attached to them. They don't want me to leave them. I don't want to leave them, but leave them I must if I'm going to get on with a long series. And what you say about that this is a bit of a departure for me, it's true. But when I started my career writing about Anne Boleyn, in The Other Boleyn Girl, I started writing about her sister, Mary Boleyn, that my interest was always with the less known women and not so much attached to the royals. So in that series, there's a few books which deal with women who are not really known to history at all. For instance, I wrote a novel called Lady of the Rivers, which covers Jacquetta, Duchess of Bedford, who doesn't even have a biography to her name, never mind any sort of version in fictional history. So it was, my interest was telling these stories of relatively unknown women. And one woman led me to another, which got me, as it were, into the court of the Tudors and then to their predecessors, the Plantagenets. But coming out of the court into the lives of ordinary women is more a reversion to type than probably most people realize.
I see. You know, I'm going to get to in a moment how I feel you're still telling our stories, everyone's stories, but we'll get to that in a moment. But I'm glad you didn't skip a generation, because I feel this particular era in terms of gaining wealth or beginning to gain wealth is important, because I think most people feel that in knowing English history, we know that it seems like you can't get out of your station, right? That's mainly created that if you're born to service, you stay in service. If you're born to gentry, you stay in gentry, and that it's hard to move between levels. But I'm fascinated by this series because I always wondered, is it possible and how was it done? So you answer that question, and you're beginning to answer the question, but it also answered a question that I've always wondered. My reading of English literature, of course, is steeped in Jane Austen, for example, and she makes many references to how people look down their noses at those who earn their wealth by trade. And I'd always wondered, well, what is the problem with that? I mean, trade, money is money. But in your description of these warehouses where Eleanor and her daughter live and work, we see that it's not a glamorous situation. That to be a tradesperson, it's dirty, it's not glamorous. So how did you come to want to get there first, to say, okay, here's the beginning?
What you say is very, very interesting to me. One of the things that I really dislike about traditional historical fiction as it used to be written was that it is so, especially in England, so very snobby. One of the difficulties with English history is that it is riddled with snobbery. So history is written itself. The records are about the elite, and the focus is always on the elite. It's always on the king, the aristocracy, or the gentry. And English society itself, this is no news to anybody, is still riddled with a terrible snobbery, which means that we don't explore the stories of landless people. We don't explore the stories of working class people. We certainly don't tell the stories of the servants' hall, except in the new snobbery, which is upstairs, downstairs, which is, you know, the contrast. I mean, Downton Abbey is hugely guilty of this, that you've got this sort of house almost in aspic, where you have the gentry upstairs and you have the servants downstairs, and there's a sort of patronizing servant story which runs throughout at the same time as the gentry story. And real history, real life is not like that at all. Any society has to have in it a degree of mobility, just so that you get intelligent people at the top. If you didn't have the grammar school system, or the promotion through trade, or the willingness of the aristocracy to marry rich people who made their fortunes through work, then you wouldn't have a society which could last at all, because the rich people would run out of money and they would run out of sons. You know, what we know from history is that people tend to run out of direct sons and heirs in this period within about 3 generations. So the illusion of this timeless, permanent elite is an illusion of snobbery. And it's very interesting to read history and to see that's the case. It's completely fascinating and quite radical to bring it into historical fiction and say, no, there are not ladies with particular sensibility. I mean, this is a feminist question as well. There are not people who are completely incapable of work, whose hands are so soft, whose manners are so lovely that they can't scrub a floor. In fact, there is no difference between the servant and the lady except the luck of birth or their achievement.
And in Dark Tides, you're also showing how gentry can get mixed up, and you know that gentry is not as soft and clean and direct as gentry may want you to believe.
Absolutely. And in Dark Tides, we have a woman who is a conscious adventuress who arrives at the warehouse related to them in their class with an absolute determination to get across the river. I mean, London, like many cities, has this lovely geographical metaphor that if you're on the south side in London, you are poor and working class, and you live in very, very, very dirty, disagreeable slum buildings. If you live in the north side of the river, then you're in the palaces. And you're at this time, because the city is being rebuilt, you know, if you're going towards the west, then that's the side you want to be. That's where the beautiful mansions are. So it's literally a time of great flux and change. We, you know, in England, in the period we're talking about, England's just come out of a revolution in which they beheaded the king. I mean, it was a genuine treasonous rebellion, which was successful for a good period of time. So, of course, in a sense, everything's up for grabs. And among the people who grab wealth and power are the returning monarchists, who then immediately try and pretend they've been there forever. And part of the illusion of English history is the way we think that the monarchy now is a direct descendant from, I don't know, William the Conqueror. And it's simply not so. There have been countless adventurers and changes and chopping and changes in order to keep the institution there.
You know, it's sort of frustrating to me, not frustrating, but Sir James is so annoying in certain that's his determination. You know, he's looking for an heir, and he has no idea how bad he comes off. Like, oh yes, I've come back for you, but I really need an heir, and can you get me one? and it makes him seem so, I don't want to say heartless, because he obviously feels a lot of love, but his focus on you know, continuing the line seems to come before anything else, whether he realizes it or not.
I mean, I'm not surprised he irritates you. He is the epitome of white, entitled, privileged male at a period when white, entitled, privileged males were not viewed as anything disagreeable. I mean, he literally is the most important person in his world by virtue of his birth. He's had to make a lot of compromises in his life to get to maintain his position. But that's part of our story, which is that you might be born into it, but you're going to have to work to keep it. But it's nothing that he's ever had to do has questioned his belief that what he has to offer these poor women on the warehouse, on the wrong side of the river, is a fantastic opportunity and a privilege. And part of his arc in the novel is his learning that they might choose something different.
Yeah, and they know more of the world, it seems, and how the world works, and of their own hearts than he does.
Yes, I mean, I think I'm always hesitant to make great claims for women, but I think one of the things that we see from the fact that women don't have, especially in this society, any external power. They have no legal rights at all. They have no political rights at all. So what they really do understand is what opportunities there are before them and what isn't, what doors are closed and what are opened, and what they themselves want. Because unlike Sir James, who has never really had to consult what does he want and can he get it, he's always just had what he wants. But actually, it's a very educational experience to be in the situation where you have to consider your desires against the possibilities.
Yes, Philippa, I think that's the women, and I read both Tidelands and Dark Tides, and I feel that what attracted me, especially to Eleanor, is it reminded me of reading Jane Eyre when I was only 13, and it was pivotal for me because to me Jane Eyre taught me how to think, because she too was someone who had no place in the world and had to fend for herself, and she was always thinking, okay, here's what I need to do. How do I do this? How do I get from A to B? Because I know I can't be here anymore. And Eleanor is the same way. She's constantly thinking, here's where I am, but she knows that I need to get my daughter married. I need to not fall on the parish, and just knowing that she can make her way in the world somehow, even though she doesn't know how. She's constantly acting from a sense of agency, and I admired that. I found that so hopeful despite her difficult circumstances.
Thank you. I mean, it's wonderful to hear you say that. And the thing that you say about agency, I entirely agree. I think as a woman writing today, I would only be interested in describing a heroine who had agency, who had the ability to analyze the world that she lived in and try and make her way through it. I don't think, for me, I have no interest in women, fictional women, who in a sense are passive in their lives, who are the object of male affection or male abuse and are in a sense picked up for good or for bad for their lives. And what's been so interesting about literally decades now of research into real women in history is that I have never yet met a real woman in history who is passive in the way that historical fictional heroines in the past have been passive. Nobody waits for their prince to come. Literally nobody. Everybody. How about the villain?
How about the villain? But and I'm going to read this from your author's note, because we're talking about women with agency. And you wrote this at the end of Tidelands. You're talking about Eleanor, and you say that she continues to insist on an independent moral judgment and on her own independent thinking and feeling. Dependent upon her neighbors for a living, dependent on a man for her status, she nonetheless thinks, feels, and lives for herself. At a time when women counted for nothing, she values herself. She is, if only to herself, a heroine. And I was thinking, Livia is very much the same way. Even though she's a villain, right? She has her own judgment. She thinks for herself. She is her own heroine. And yet she has to be a villain. So tell me about the creation of this villain.
Well, she's a villain in the context of the novel, but she's not a villain to herself. And you know, that idea that any woman, in the novel, of course, not the women I describe, but that any woman has to have an attachment to herself. She has to see herself as the heroine of her own life, because otherwise, what are you? Otherwise, you're maybe a side character in someone else's story, or you're the offstage wife, or you're the woman behind the throne, or all the many ways that we have found to describe women, not allowing them to be the heroines of their own life. If you're not the heroine of your own life, what are you going to do? You know, you've lost before you started. And Livia is the heroine of her own life. She makes it clear to others. She's very clear in her own mind, but she's actually explicit to others that she is a liar, that she will tell lies if she wants to, that she isn't bound by other people's conventions. She certainly doesn't love her child as one would expect a mother to do. She certainly doesn't love the people that she professes to be in love with. She certainly doesn't love any of the husbands that we see in the course of the novel, because more than anything else, Livia wants to rise in society, make some money, and get to a place where she feels is a proper theatre for her behavior. And of course, what we're describing is a highly narcissistic personality who sees the world as a theatre for her behavior. But that gives her, as we know from real life narcissists, gives her tremendous strength, because she's not held back, as so many of us are, by consideration for other people's feelings. She's not held back, as so many of us shouldn't be, by conventional beliefs as to what a well-behaved woman does. Livia is absolutely batting for her own team, and it's so exciting and so freeing to write a woman character whose only nod to convention is that she looks all right while she's doing whatever the hell she's doing.
What I loved about her, because a villain can be, if not well drawn, flat, so very flat. And even though she's narcissistic, it's fascinating to me how she connects enough with other people to understand what they want, right? And she's constantly making it seem like she's giving everybody what they want. And I just thought it was so brilliant to watch her have work. There were times I was just like, oh God, when is someone going to stop her? But then I just had to sit back and say, wow, she's good. That was what a move, So how do you come to figure out that extra layer, right? That she just can't be straight narcissist.
Yes, I think you'll know yourself that when you're creating a fictional character, you start off with everybody starts off with different things. I probably start off with probably the appearance, and then, in a sense, the layers and layers and layers behind that. But I never, I hope, write any character that's just a stereotype of a woman. In a sense, as a woman and as a feminist, I would not want to do that. I'm sure I've done it in earlier books. I'm sure I've not thought through all my characters in earlier books, and I probably do it for walking on parts that I'm not frightfully interested in. So I may do it then. But when you're talking about a woman a fictional woman that I'm going to spend 2 years with, they have depths, and I'm going to understand them. Of course, I'm going to create them in that time, because firstly, it's nobody is one-sided. Everybody has their reason for being as they are, and part of living your life well is to understand what someone else is thinking and feeling and how they have come to this place. And as a historian, all the time you want to know the backstory, what brought you here, what, not just even the personal backstory, but what sequence of historical events put you here and then moved you to here. And so in Livia's backstory, the fact that the first husband who marries her rather against her will as an arranged marriage, so she's quite a victim in that marriage, and she manages to save herself and indeed revenge herself magnificently by stealing from him when he has in a sense bought her. And it's understanding that Livia isn't just, when she arrives in London, she's a pretty completed deceiver, adulterer, thief, forger, fraud, nearly a murderer. When she arrives in London, she's that. But before she gets to London, all of the events have happened in her life that have made her find that her only way to succeed.
She's fast. She had to learn that as well somehow. She's so quick thinking.
Yes.
She seems to be able to walk into a room and assess it very quickly and then act with it. And I was just impressed, like, where would she learn that? Or was it innately her? Was she just, and this is how she's always survived, the fact that she had her wits about her at all times.
Yes, I mean, I do think she's someone who is certainly on the narcissistic spectrum. So she does see everyone as, in a sense, a sort of potential feed. So she does scan a room immediately and go, I mean, even in our own life in the modern world, we are aware of people that you meet. Sometimes they walk in, they've clocked everybody of interest and help that's going to occur in that room. Both of us publish, publishing parties, when someone's looking over your shoulder for the more important person, it's that sort of spirit with which Livia approaches relationships. She's not, so much of us are delayed and confused by looking for emotional depth or truth or even love. Livia is never wasting her time looking for that. She's looking for personal advantage. And by concentrating on that, she makes herself tremendously powerful.
You feel her power throughout the book, and it's constantly at the forefront. Okay, what's going to happen next? Is she going to succeed? And even though villain, it's amazing how much she grasps the character, the attention of everyone in the room, but also of us as well. So
thank you. I love the very last scene. Well, it is the very last scene, so I can't spoil it, but there is just a great scene when there's a wedding, and is it going to happen or is it not going to happen? And Livia's everybody else gets frightened, and Livia's nerve apparently never quavers, because she's always got her escape planned.
Yeah, it's brilliant. It's just
Thank you. Thank you.
Amazing.
Appreciate it.
Now, place can be a character as well, right? And in Tidelands, Fairmile, which is where the family originally comes from, to me, it was a character in and of itself. It had a sound, it had a voice, it had a look, a feel. It was treacherous, it was dangerous. So number one, how did you come to the idea that this place had to be a character, number one? And number two, can you talk about how that place echoes in the settings of Dark Tides?
It was fascinating to me. It's a place that I know. It's a real place in England. It's Tidelands. It's a coastal tidal estuary. It's a harbour. It's very close to Chichester Harbour in West Sussex. I know the area very well. I lived there for about 4 years. And And I was working as a conservation warden, part-time volunteer. Can't say it did me any good, except I was on the harbour for almost every day of the summer for 3 or 4 summers, watching over a colony of little terns, who are a rare bird in England, not rare with you, but rare in England. And, they had their breeding site there. And without realizing it, watching the tide come in, watching it go out again, watching these little birds hatch and then fly, it was extraordinarily haunting. It just obviously went deep into my imagination, into my memory. So when I wanted to set the first novel in a place that was desolate but beautiful, this was the place that came to me straight away. And the more I described it, and the more I wrote about it, and the more I researched it, as well as if I didn't know it at all, the more I realized that it worked really well also as a metaphor for the family, that it's marginal land, and they are marginal to society. It's sometimes sea, it's sometimes mud, it's sometimes, there's a point in which it actually gets reclaimed, so it becomes agricultural land, and then the sea breaks in and it floods again. So everything about their lives, which is so unstable and so unreliable and so full of threat, in that they are poor at a time where it's very, very dangerous to be poor. She's a single woman at a time where you really have to have a husband to negotiate the family's way in the world. And she's a midwife at a time where people are starting to turn on women working with herbs and healing and accusing them of witchcraft. So she's absolutely on the margins in every single way, including the fact that her house is on the edge of this tidal estuary. So it was a very, very powerful place for me to describe. And then I had this literally a vision that I was in Venice. I was on one of the islands of the Venetian lagoon doing research for the Venice section of book 2 of Dark Tides, which is set partly in Venice. And I looked out at the lagoon. In Venice all the time, you're looking at the fantastic buildings and the beautiful canals and the beautiful palaces and the glorious streets. And for once, I was actually right out of Venice on a ruined, by a ruined fort on an island. And I looked out over the lagoon and I saw again this estuary environment, the mud banks, the reed banks, the water birds crying, the sense that when the tide's up, it's flooded. When it's down, it's dangerous mud. And I went, oh, my character would recognize this. This is his home. So when he is in danger, he at least has a refuge in this place that anyone else would regard as terribly uncertain, because he's brought up in that sort of landscape.
Yeah, I like you. I'm going to say, I'm going to read this part. Where did you come from? Lydia was curious. For Roberto told me of land like the Venice Lagoon, half land and half water, changing every tide with the birds calling between sky and sea. It was like that, Alice agreed. We were always on the edge, between poverty and surviving, between friends and enemies. In the Tidelands, between water and fields, we were on the edge of everything. I love the echo, right? The echo of the Tidelands and of this mysterious, beautiful place that is Venice. So the connection, I hope that connection somehow can stay, can echo through books, because you're right, I feel like it is a metaphor, and it is his family.
Absolutely. I think, there are families and there are people and there are, even nations whose nature and whose feelings are very much formed by the geography they live in. And this is a family that is very, very much committed to, although they fear it and although prosperity means moving away, they'll move back, because they have this sense of this little part of the country as being somewhere that is typical to them. Mm-hmm. And I mean, similarly, in the novel Dark Tides, there's a big section, about a third of the novel, is set in New England, where the Pokanoket Nation, Native American Indians, have a relationship to the land which is exactly the same. That it's beyond analysis, it's beyond description. It's a sense of belonging, which so many of us in the modern world have so emphatically lost, but some people still feel.
Well, Philippa, I wanted to know, why did you have part of the novel in America? Because, you know, we spoke of how the family is going to go through generations and into the empire. So why have America in the mix?
Partly it came out of the character's experience. The character Ned is brother to Eleanor from Tidelands, and he's a Cromwellian soldier in the English Civil War. And so at the Restoration, when Charles II is brought back into England, he cannot stand to live in a society which is again under a king, under an elite, in which working people will have no chance of owning their own lands and no chance of rising out of poverty. And so what he does, which many people did at the time, is he thinks he'll go to a new England and he will make a new and better England in the Americas. And he thinks that he will go to New England and create a society which has no king, a society which is more equal, and a society in which a man is allowed to make his fortune, and even a woman is allowed to make her fortune, and in which men can be free, men and women can be free. And of course, the irony for Ned is that's what he's going to America to find. And what he finds there is actually it's not an empty land at all. It's a land already occupied by people who live in a far more egalitarian way and with far stronger affinity to their own landscape and to the nature that is around them than he could ever have imagined. And what he finds amongst the settlers is a community which is already getting highly stratified and highly snob, in which he is yet again the ferryman on the edge of the river, on the edge of the community, and north of him is the wilderness and the Native American people, where he has a great sense of wanting to be. And south of him is the little village of Hadley.
He's constantly being told, you're going to have to make a choice. Right? You're going to have to make a choice. And it seems to me that where one succeeds in life, I don't know, it feels like he shouldn't have to make that choice, right? That he just wants to be Ned. He just wants to be who he is. Do you feel that society is always going to be pushing him and people like his family into making choices? You know, you have to choose sides.
Yes, because in a sense, when you say he's just Ned, I mean, he is concealing the fact that he has already made a choice. He has a deep choice towards what was in his time leveler politics, Cromwell's radical politics. He's anti-monarchy, he's anti-elite, he's really in favour of, as the levelers were, small landowners, everybody owning a small piece of their own land so that you can work on your own prosperity, on your own patch without stealing from anyone else. And it's that conflict in him in a family which is going to be inevitably linked to stealing from others, because they're going to be in trade and they're going to be part of the expanding British Empire. It's that contradiction at the heart of this family that's going to run right the way through the books, and which runs through his experience of New England.
So will the series continue? Do you know yet? Will it continue on a dual track of, well, not really a dual track, but multi-location, so that America will still always
yeah, my ambition is to end up, in a sense, somebody speaking of something else said grandly, the history of the world in one family. I mean, what I would like to end up doing is write something which really understands the expansion and the prosperity of particularly England, but Britain, from where we are, 1640, right the way through to probably something as late as the 19th century, in terms of this individual family, by its members going overseas or staying home and investing in overseas or profiting from overseas ventures. And, that's it's a story that, although it's a feminist phrase, that the political is personal, but what we haven't done very much in historical fiction, or indeed in family history, is actually make the connection between the big political sweeps, the British Empire, and the individual families who literally hitched themselves to empire and saw their family fortunes take off, like a rocket, because they had joined in at the, when it took off.
Yeah. Do you find this question of, I kept thinking about fairness, right? When people, the question of risk came up, Alice was saying, well, you have to risk. If we're going to be anything, we have to make to take a chance. And I recently, in Facebook, there's a discussion here in America about student loans, for example, and whether or not the government should give student loans. And I saw a conversation on social media where someone was saying that she thought it wasn't fair that her family had been careful and only borrowed a certain amount, whereas someone else borrowed more, possibly to send their child to for example, an Ivy League school. And this person said it wasn't fair, right? That person should have more money forgiven than they did, when really that other person also took a bigger risk, perhaps. But I just thought that word unfair, and it came up to me in reading Dark Tides, because I'm thinking, well, if they do succeed, someone might say that it was not fair, right? Ill-gotten gains, right? And it seems like in reading this story, I'm curious as to see how it will be received as it goes on, how people will say, cheer them on and say, wow, yay for them. How many will say it wasn't fair?
Yes, I mean, of course, the people who complain about unfairness are the ones who have not profited from the risk. The people who unfairly jeopardized their fortunes or their future, and it paid off, are the ones who then talk about their incredible skill and their foresight and their ability. There aren't very many rich people who say, hand on heart, look, I took a bit of a gamble, possibly with money that wasn't even my own, and it paid off. The only people who talk about in that way are the ones who end up in the dock, explaining how it went wrong. People who are successful tend to bury their risk-taking behavior, and especially their criminal behavior, under the respectability of the fortune they have made. So, yeah, I mean, everybody takes a risk. We all take risks every day. What I think is so interesting, especially in these times, is how terribly bad we now know human beings are at assessing risk. And one of the things in the novel that perhaps shines out for me is that Livia, because she is entirely focused only on one thing, which is her self-interest and how to improve her life. She's very good at assessing risk. She's very good at assessing the people that she is using. Whereas anyone who has half a mind to other things, like in the case of the world we live in now, like what about the risk to my family of infection if I do this? What about the risk to my society if I go here? Once you start thinking about a broader issues, it's very, very hard to assess risk. The more elements you introduce, the harder it is to assess. And unfortunately for us, the only way to make a mature risk assessment is to take in as much information as you possibly can. And we simply don't have good brains at that. We're much better with a bit of reptile brain, like Livia, going like, what's in this for me? Just that. That's all I'm interested in.
We have a lot of the ancestry, DNA, people researching their backgrounds. I'm hoping that reading your book will help people think about and appreciate risks that have been taken in the past, that may have brought them to where they are. I know that was going on for me as I was reading this. I was thinking about my father in particular, but my father didn't know how to read, right? He never learned how to read. He came from a farm in Mississippi and worked in factories in the Midwest. And I keep thinking about, and here I am in Connecticut, like with a nice house and a big Christmas tree. And it just made me think about and appreciate the step that he took and his siblings took that brought us to this place. And even further back, if you think about it, because of course, I had ancestors who were enslaved. So maybe we will learn something about risk in terms of when we look at and think about the risks that have been taken. I don't know. But that's what was on my mind when I think about that.
I find what you're saying very moving, genuinely do, because it is about the people like your father and your grandfather having the courage to go, I am here now, but I don't have to be here forever. And I will take some risks to try and move myself on elsewhere. And all of us, if we go back to our families far enough, we go back, we are most likely to go back far enough, you will find in the end, white as well as black families, mixed race families, you will find people who are poor, who are trying very, very hard. And, the fact that you have made to where you are, I mean, for me, more than anything else, to be a woman writing from a father who could not read, I mean, that's such a tribute to him and to you, but such a vision that he must have had as to what he could be and what you could be. It's inspiring. I mean, that to me is what family history should be about. It's set in England, we spend a lot of time trying to prove ourselves to be related to, Henry VIII. But actually, to me, family history should be about recognizing the extraordinary gambles that our ancestors made to get out of the field and out of the mud and into the university.
Yes. Philippa, before we go, there's another thing I wanted to ask you about, extremely relevant to our times right now. Boleyn went through plague, Venice, it comes up a couple of times, both in Dark Tides and Tidelands, the fear of infection and plague. And I wanted to know what it was like for you to be writing about that aspect of Venice. I'm assuming you were even writing about this even as the pandemic was coming to the fore, and what that was like for you and how you felt.
Yes, I was writing about that there's a big part of Venice when our hero goes to the quarantine island in the lagoon. It still exists there now. It's a museum now, and you can go and see the warehouses where the goods were brought in and laid out and smoked to make them clean, and where the crews of the visiting ships, the trading ships, had to stay if there was any question that they had an infection. Without any idea of germ theory, they had an idea of quarantining. I mean, it's quite extraordinary how sophisticated the Venetians are at that time, at the same time as with no scientific background. It was extraordinary and it was troubling, but I have to say the biggest theme for me coming through both novels was, we were at a time when, as we still are, when there are so many refugees trying to move from one troubled part of the world to another, a lot of them trying to come into Europe. I know you have refugee issues in the States as well. And it just seemed to me that what my story was very much was about people being free to move from one place to another, and how valuable it is to have a world in which that's possible, and how when you restrict it, as we did, as the colonialists did with the Native Americans, that what immediately ensues is a human tragedy, and you don't know how much damage you're doing when you stop allowing people to go from one place to another.
Well, I hope those lines open up again, because and you and I as writers, we know what it is to be able to go to different places and be inspired by them. I know it's important in your writing to visit Venice for this work, but I pray that will change in the coming months.
Oh man, yeah.
Well, Philippa, thank you so much for speaking with me. And I enjoy your work. Looking forward to more in this series, and just bravo for undertaking it.
Thank you so much. It's very kind, Sophfronia. I appreciate what you said very, very much.
And I want to thank you both very much. What a fascinating discussion. I just was thrilled by everything, and I know our audiences as well. Philippa, I hope that the day will come when you can travel to Hartford to come visit Mark Twain's house, and we're right near Hadley, so you can go there as well. And Sophfronia, I hope we'll see you again very soon. Thank you both very much. And I'm going to applaud on behalf of our whole audience.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was really, really enjoyable. I liked it a lot. Thank you.
Good. Thank you.
Good
See
night.
you. Good night.
All right. Best wishes.
Thank you.